Here we are, guys, in our final part of our little series on Gideon. And Gideon has been on an incredible journey since we first met him a few weeks ago. Just by way of recap, Gideon was a bit of a scaredy cat, actually, stupidly threshing wheat in the middle of a hole in the ground when we first met him. But God called him a mighty warrior. And then we talked about how we are what God says we are. And then Gideon actually started out by getting his worship right. And that was all about priorities, really. That was really important that we put God first in our lives. And so he took away all the altars and the poles, whatever, like an Asherah pole, Kath was telling us about. Not really sure what that is, but he took away a pole to another god. And that's what he did. He got his priorities right. And so, as a result of that, in some ways, Gideon went on to win an astonishing victory against the Midianites, or I guess more accurately, God won an astonishing victory with Gideon's cooperation. Because Gideon listened to God, he made a difference. And I think that the contrast between Gideon when we first met him and this one at the end just couldn't be more stark. And so, to a movie fan like me, the story of Gideon so far is like the perfect story arc of a brilliant movie. You have this young person who's plucked from obscurity. He's given this enormous challenge to do, which he prepares for, often preparing in the kind of hidden place, in the small things, before he's trusted by God with the big thing. Then the big challenge comes, the big day comes, and he triumphs over that. It's actually quite a similar kind of story arc to some of my favorite movies. Like if you think of Daniel in The Karate Kid, or Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, or Neo in The Matrix, or Frodo in The Lord of the Rings. Although to be honest, The Lord of the Rings is actually the most boring set of films that I've ever watched in my entire life. I literally can't stay awake watching them. Or Elsa in Frozen, although to be fair, she is already a princess at the beginning. Well, I'm actually the type of person that I can't just be watching a film and then go and do something else at the end. Whilst I'm watching it, I'm sort of analysing it, and I'm looking at the scenery and the cinematography. I'm going, is that a Roger Deakins kind of a cinematography that's going on there? And then so I'm perhaps googling a little bit, and then when it gets to the end, I don't just go and make a cup of tea or even just really sit and bask in the glory of this film that I've just watched. What I actually do is I Google to find out anything about the background that I can find out, or the connections that this movie might have to other movies or anybody else that's made a kind of similar story. And anyway, that is a really long-winded way of saying that that I love films and that I'm really into the detail of them. And as a result, I know that the study of stories is called narratology, and that this kind of story arc that is present in all of those films and present in the first part of Gideon's story is called the hero's journey, or the monomyth. The monomyth, brilliant name. Anyway, what normally happens at the end of this kind of story arc is that the hero comes home from his adventure a wiser and a greater person, and he's been kind of changed by the journey. There's a huge applause normally and a celebration from the people of their home city. But this kind of hero, they normally shun the limelight and they renew their acquaintance with their family. And as the camera pans away, we're supposed to believe that they're going to live happily ever after. Perhaps some words might appear on the screen to update us on how their story's been lived out, maybe with a slightly like amusing comment at the end, like Dave lived in Boston for the rest of his life, but he never ate oysters again. Or Mary passed all her exams and became the youngest doctor in America. She never lost her phobia of feet, though. And so that's the kind of scene that we're expecting at the end of this story of Gideon, right? That's what we're expecting. We're expecting that the story has come into land after this amazing victory, and we're going to kind of get a bit of a happy ever after moment. So I'm going to read from Judges chapter 8, verses 22 to 27. I think it's going to come up on the screen, and we'll see how Gideon's story comes into land. Verse 22 then. After the battle with the Midianites, the Israelites said, Gideon, you rescued us. Now we want you to be our king. Then, after your death, your son and then your grandson will rule. No, Gideon replied, I won't be your king, and my son won't be your king either. Only the Lord is your ruler. But I will ask you to do one thing. Give me all the earrings that you took from the enemy. The enemy soldiers had been Ishmaelites, and they wore gold earrings. The Israelite soldiers replied, Of course we'll give you the earrings. Then they spread out a robe on the ground and tossed the earrings on it. The total weight of the gold was nearly 20 kilograms. In addition, there was gold from the camel's ornaments and from the beautiful jewelry worn by the Midianite kings. Gideon also took their purple robes. Gideon returned to his home in Ophrah and had the gold made into a statue, which the Israelites soon started worshipping. They became unfaithful to God, and even Gideon and his family were trapped into worshipping the statue. Oh no, Gideon, what have you done? That's not the way the story's supposed to go. You're supposed to be shunning the limelight, remember? You're supposed to refuse the gifts, the attention, the applause. You're supposed to live quietly with your beautiful wife until maybe in a couple of years' time you get called on again, and there's a rerun or a repeat or whatever it's called. Sequel, that's the word I'm searching for. Instead, what happened, incredibly jarringly to the previous part of the story, having stepped out of the way to allow God to win the victory over the Midianites, what happens is this. The people try and credit Gideon with the victory. You rescued us, they say, which is something that happens a lot, isn't it? That we're credited when God does something amazing, and God just gets the blame when something goes wrong. And they want to make him the king. See, Israel hasn't even had kings up to this point. That's one of their unique things. God is their king. But in the other nations around where Israel were, it worked the other way around. The king often became their God. Israel are almost saying, Gideon, you won this battle for us. You can be our God. And he says, I won't be your king, and my son won't be your king either. Only the Lord is your ruler. Great call, Gideon. That's actually the perfect answer. I literally can't think of a better way that Gideon could have answered that. But it goes a bit downhill from there. He then gets them to give just the earrings. I mean, earrings, right? Like tiny little things. Even those sort of bigger hoop earrings are like, I don't know, what, 7 or 8 centimeters. Just the earrings. He takes the earrings and he puts them together. Actually, it's quite a lot when you put it together. It's like 20 kilograms of gold. In case you're wondering, 20 kilograms of gold feels a lot like 20 kilograms of sugar. It's just a little joke there. Anyway, so he makes a statue out of all of this gold, and then they all worship it. Even Gideon and his family are trapped into worshipping it. They worship it as an idol. It's a really stupid thing to do because it's just a lump of metal, right? It's got no power or authority at all to do anything. It's also what the Israelites have done wrong before. Who can forget the golden calf incident of Moses and Aaron? All the plunder, all of the gold that they took whenever they defeated someone in battle was supposed to end up in a temple. It was God's because he won the victory. That was the acknowledgement. And that's what they'd always done before. But somehow it had ended up in Gideon's robe instead. And somehow, what was supposed to be a blessing became an idol. And so the ending of Gideon's story is tragic. Gideon ends up after this with loads of wives and concubines, and that's actually a sign of power and wealth, not a life lived in worship for God. And actually, after this, after Gideon's time, Israel's worship is scarred and broken for generations afterwards. Oh no! What a terrible end to a brilliant story. Nothing like the hero's journey. Oh, what could have been. Oh, what should have been. What makes Gideon's story so important to us all of these years later is that we all know people like Gideon, people who've been on an amazing journey, who've grown from the equivalent of hiding in a wine press to being great leaders, or people who've achieved amazing things in their lives. But somehow, what was supposed to be their blessing became their idol. Sportsmen like Lance Armstrong comes to mind. 7 consecutive Tour de France wins, stripped of all of them for doping. Or this whole Me Too thing, this like people like Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein and Kevin Spacey, powerful and talented people who lost it all. And there are politicians and authors and kind of TV presenters and so many other people that have ended up in this same state. And in fact, Christians and church leaders are not immune either. There are plenty of casualties along the way. And let's be real for a moment, shall we? We all make mistakes. If you've never screwed up, then send me an email. I'd love to meet you. But the greater the victory of God in your life, the more you have to lose. Looking at Gideon's story, there's one word on which this whole story pivots. He goes from saying exactly the right thing to exactly the wrong thing really, really quickly. He walks from a life of God's blessing to a life trapped in idolatry. He goes from getting his worship right to getting his worship wrong. In one word in that passage, and that word is but. B-U-T. He's going great guns. He says, but I will ask you to do one thing. Give me all the earrings you took from the enemy. But it's the moment of compromise. It's a word that comes to define the end part of Gideon's life. Just imagine Gideon's ancestors telling the story of his life. Gideon had an amazing God-given blessed victory over the Midianites, but he blew it at the last minute. Gutting. It's the same with Lance Armstrong, isn't it? He won the Tour de France 7 times, but he cheated to do it. Or Kevin Spacey, amazing actor, huge talent, great body of work, but he behaved like a sleazeball. I've got friends who have amazing, incredible gifts for the church who aren't even Christians anymore because of this one word. But. It's the most destructive word in the English language. Psychologists will tell you that if you're paying someone a compliment, but it's got the word but in the middle, it's completely worthless. In fact, my wife would tell you that as well. But anyway, just an example, like, you look great today, Joel, but maybe you could wear a nicer shirt next time. You see, the but ruins the whole compliment. I wonder how people will talk about you in generations to come. How will they talk about me? Will they say things like, Paul saw God move in power in his life and in the town of Swindon, but his family only got the worst of him? Or, Paul was involved in serving people his whole life. God used him wonderfully, but he screwed up his life one day in March 2023 or whatever. So what I want to say today is, don't let your life be defined by a but. Don't let your life be defined by a failure. In all of this, I want to say that there is hope. God is gracious. whatever mistakes we've made, they don't have to define your future. Mistakes and sinfulness, that's what Jesus died for. That's the gospel. That's the good news. But we are called to finish well. You see, your journey is not the same as your destination. We can travel through struggle, through fallenness, through screwing up, and out the other side into life. The writer of Hebrews puts it like this: and let us run the race with perseverance, the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. So following Jesus means that when we stumble, we can get back up again. We focus our eyes on Jesus and we carry on running until we're finished. Imagine in Gideon's story, if he'd got back up and carried on the race, we'd be saying, Gideon had an incredibly blessed victory over the Midianites. And although he made mistakes, he pursued God with all his heart. It's the same God. But where's the but? It's vanished. There's no but anymore. Don't let your life be defined by a but. Don't let your life be defined by a failure. You know, I look back on my own life. I mean, I'm actually quite nervous about holding myself up as an example, but at least I'm an idiot in this one. I've been a Christian since I was 17. It's been an amazing journey. But I remember times where I've made lousy decisions, particularly as a student, enjoying university perhaps a little bit too much, but hurting people and behaving really selfishly along the way. I mean, that's a frighteningly long time ago. But if I'd stopped then, if I'd let that define what my life was going to be like, I would have missed out on so much. I'd have missed out on being in Swindon, which I love. I'd have missed out on all that God's done in my life over the last 20 years. I mean, I've never stopped being an idiot in some ways. I still make mistakes, but I'm learning to get up and to keep on running. We all make mistakes. We stumble. We get our priorities wrong. We chicken out. But let's not let that stuff define us. God is moving in and through us, and that will always eclipse our failures. Let's be remembered for how we finished the race. We serve the poor. We listen to the Spirit. We worship with our whole lives. We love people well. We get back up and we keep running towards Jesus. I really believe that if we grasp this, if we grasp that the mistakes that we've made don't have to define our future, if we get up and we keep running towards Jesus, that our lives will be transformed. But not just that, I wonder what our families would look like. I wonder what amazing adventures we'd go on with Jesus. I'm just imagining all of us sat in our living rooms across Swindon, making the decision to run after Jesus with our whole hearts, to put aside the mistakes that we've made, to allow Jesus to restore and redeem us. Just imagining what we might achieve in the future. What would Swindon really begin to look like? So once more, don't let your life be defined by a but. Don't stop. Keep running the race. Finish well.